Okay, it will take us probably few minutes to bring the people back to the room. Okay. I hope that during the lunch you had the opportunity to start developing your ideas. For the rest of the day, we will have less presentations. That was intentionally, so that you can have more time to focus on your projects. Unfortunately, the next speaker in the program, he had a knee replacement surgery a few days ago, and he was told by his doctor that this is a matter of few days. He's in Hawaii right now, so he thought maybe the climate will fix the knee faster than he thought. But last night he sent me an email, he cannot move, so he cannot, whatever. The good news on that is that we have his material available, and these are 3 articles he wrote in the last 6-7 months on the topic he was supposed to talk about, and that topic is creating shared value. How many of you are familiar with the concept of creating shared value? Okay. And how many of you are familiar with the concept of corporate social responsibility? Okay. This is bad news for Professor Michael Porter, who basically wrote the main article on creating shared value. He and his team thinks everybody knows about creating shared value, and even they declare that CSR is that. Now, CVS or whatever is creating shared value is replacing CSR. And the interesting thing and missed opportunity, but I'm very familiar with the whole thing, so if you are individually interested in that topic, I'll be happy to talk with you today, is that the very concept of creating shared value was developed by the guy who was supposed to speak here, Niels. He was the vice president in Nestle, and they developed that whole idea of creating shared value. Only down the road, they engaged a consulting firm where Michael Porter is engaged to work with them. And then they took that very aggressively, promoted the famous article in Harvard Business Review. And this is where we are. In any case, I will highly recommend to read these very short articles, but very in-depth, to really get a good sense of what the issues are. This also reminded me that, in fact, I brought a draft report, which I will leave on few of the tables because I don't think I have 15 copies, because that's still a draft, because we have you now on our list, okay, communication list or whatever, we can send you electronic version of that to you. But that whole document was written by me. Well, now we have a commercial break. Huh? This is a marketing break, which I wrote for the German Development Agency, GIZ. And it's a matter of few days to have the final version electronically available. Why I'm mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because in that report, I'm making an argument that for implementation perspective, which is very much what we are discussing here, it's really not that relevant to spend time arguing, is creating shared value better than CSR, or arguing that there is a framework which solves all the problems in the world. The argument over there is you have to think in terms of a process which includes identifying and understanding the needs you are trying to address, and once you figure out what you are trying to do, to have access to different frameworks and methodologies, and you select and adjust them to solving specific needs. When you're an academic, you want to claim that now you discover the main thing, and then everything after that, before that was just, good first step, but now you did develop the framework. The argument is, no, this is not the right way of thinking, and whatever framework is, you have to adjust. Anyway, you have access to that, but I'm just saying, also think in these terms of not being over-constrained by beautifully developed framework and methodologies which usually claim more than actually they do. And always think in terms of what is the kind of academic value of that and what is the practical implementation value. Because professors are evaluated by a number of published academic articles. They are not awarded by the number of how many of these articles were actually implemented to solve real-life problems. So this is not a critique of what academia does. It's only reminding us that academia has kind of its own objective, which is not 100% it's the same with what we are trying to do when solving real-life problems, okay? So that's the introductory part of that. The other important thing, I saw Hale entering here. Okay, I thought I saw the next speaker entering here, but I don't see her now. Okay, I'll deal with that issue. Now, we have online Jeff, who will talk about his organization experience of bringing together young people working on kind of projects which might be in one or another way similar to what you are doing. And what I will ask him to do is really to focus based on their experience so far, what are the main lessons learned from getting an idea and make that idea relevant for real-life implementation. So Jeff, I hope you heard what I said. This is technology, we are relaxed. Do we have Jeff on the line, online?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Good. So the floor is yours. Make your comments, and then we will have a chance to get some reaction. And after Jeff will give the floor to Hale. Is that okay, Hale? Good. I will introduce Hale in a few minutes because she requires a little bit more introduction than just rushing through. Jeff, you have the floor, please.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor. And howdy, everyone. I'd just like to start with a warm-hearted thank you to the World Bank and Wharton Business School's Zicklin Center for hosting us all today, and also a second round of thanks to the TF teams for organizing the events. It's great to participate from New York City. In terms of actual lessons from the DO School, some of you hear of us. The DO School is an education and innovation organization. We're based in Berlin, but have programs around the world, ranging from Peru to Canada, Spain, to the United States. What we do is we give social entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders the skills they need to turn their ideas into action. Through our flagship Entrepreneurship for Good program, we have supported the launch of over 240 mission-driven organizations in over 70 countries around the world. Through this experience of launching so many ideas, we've been able to create and refine what we call the DO School method, which we now also use to bring ideas to life within leading organizations like the Siemens Foundation, H&M, Oxford University, and the government of the City of New York. Working to launch both grassroots startups and ideas within large global entities have taught us many things, but three are especially important where you sit today. First is that innovation is not just a skill or is not just an idea for a new product or service. It is a skill, or more accurately, a set of skills that enable people, teams, and organizations to turn new ideas into action, solving crucial problems for society by bringing something new to life. At the DO School, we curate the creation and implementation process by working alongside partners and guiding them through the 4 skill groups of innovation: dream, focus, plan, do. And within that group of 4, clearly the most important forms our second piece of advice, the importance of doing, taking action as soon as you viably and legitimately can. That is not to undersell the value of the first three steps, brainstorming with others, choosing the best idea based on engagement with other stakeholders and experts, and planning through those same modes of external engagement. But you must avoid the trap of thinking there is a perfect plan, avoid the temptation to map everything, know everything, and have as many contingencies as possible. The world simply changes too fast for that to be effective to create impact. Quite simply, you must learn by doing. And doing brings me to our final lesson, which is very appropriate given today's theme and even the remarks we just heard. The importance that your efforts and ideas are geared towards true social innovation, focusing on the challenges and opportunities highlighted by the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs offer us the true space for impact and sustained success in the 21st century, no matter whether you intend to work for a for-profit, a nonprofit, a multilateral, or in government. How amazing is it that we live in a time where global companies like Unilever aspire to become the world's largest NGO? People, planet, and purpose are essential for any sustainable impact in any field of endeavor. So I'd just like to close by thanking you all for taking the time today to dream up new ways to advance the SDGs and look forward to what happens when you actually start doing.
Again, you will have access to, or you already have access to his bio and the material, the website and everything. You can get a bit better understanding of what the initiative is. If there is one critical question, I think we can entertain that, or you will need some time to reflect. Jeff, we did, okay. There's a problem when you can not look at both ways at the same time. Okay, then what I will do now, and it's a really very big pleasure for me, that's why I said I need a special introduction. With Hale, we joined the World Bank something like 30 years ago? Directly from kindergarten, just to remind you, okay? Just imagine how smart we were at that time. I don't know about you now, but this is the beginning, so not to be confused on that. Hale has tremendous experience in the bank for many different kind of responsibility you had in the last few decades. And right now she's in charge of, you call that partnership and communication and external affairs vice presidency for Africa vice presidency at the World Bank. And just, last week or 2 weeks ago, we discussed and made already the first important steps of how we channel this Idea for Action initiative in Africa, working with her team. And they are already promoting this around the world, around Africa in this case. And that will be one of the engines behind the creation of additional ideas for action clubs in Africa. And even more importantly, which I didn't mention before, is that we are not only exclusively focused on who will be the six finalists, because there are issues which are relevant at the level of more global level, but there are issues which might be very important for a particular country with limited global relevance. In that case, we can recognize contributions. If, for example, there are good contribution ideas coming from Nigeria, relevant for Nigeria, then we can work with the African vice presidency of how not only create space to implement these ideas, but maybe even opening a dialogue with key stakeholders in that country. And I know that the World Bank office will have a leverage of really bringing the relevant parties together so that the impact will be much bigger. So think also in terms of something which is global, which might end up in the 6 finalists, but at the same time it might be something which is very important for a particular country or particular industry for that matter, and then we can recognize the importance of these proposals. You see the difference I was telling you, this is different from everything else. It's not $5,000 or $10,000. It's not price fixed in advance. Let's see what you are offering. We cannot second guess of how to best award ideas we haven't received yet. So that's the level of flexibility, and we are very happy for 2 reasons. One, that the World Bank and Wharton, big organizations, are flexible enough to entertain this kind of approach. And of course, the second reason to have Hale here. Okay, Hale, the floor is yours. Yes.
Thank you very much, Georgie, and a very warm welcome to all of you at the World Bank headquarters in Washington. As Georgie said, my name is Hale, and I have been working in development for a little more than 30 years. And I must say that almost 20 of the 30 years I have worked on Africa. Either lived in Africa or worked on Africa, and anyway, in different parts of Africa, the Sahel, Southern Africa, the islands, the Indian Ocean islands. I lived in Madagascar for a few years. And so I have sort of Africa under my skin. And so I'm here today to talk to you about Africa. And actually, I'm going to start by asking how many of you are contemplating proposals that will either directly affect Africa or be connected with Africa. How many of you? That's nice. That's very nice. We're very encouraged. Georgie was telling me that I think 21 countries have so far expressed interest from Africa to contribute to this. So we are hoping, we're working together with Georgie to try and increase the number of submissions from Africa, because we really hope that we can create a momentum for new ideas for making this continent go forward. Now, what I wanted to say is that going back sort of 30 years, when I started to work on Africa, Africa was characterized by famine, war, poverty, despair, diseases, conflict, a lot of indebtedness, no vision, no hope, stagnation. That was the Africa of 30 years ago. And I'm so happy that today, the Africa of today is completely different. Today's Africa is an Africa is a land of opportunity, is the new land of opportunity. Some years ago, it was America was the land of opportunity. Today, Africa is a land of opportunity. It's a land of the young. It's the youngest population on the continent. It is rich with commodities. It is rich with human capital. And it's a human capital that actually is healthier, is more educated, is more sophisticated. Today, universal primary education is universal almost in Africa. Secondary is well advanced. There are issues in terms of quality, but many are already going to university, to African universities. So we are really seeing a very major shift from 30 years ago to today in terms of the opportunities of this continent. But as you, those of you who are interested in development will know and will certainly witness in your careers, development is not easy. So as rosy as the picture appears for Africa, there are still a lot of problems. I'm going to enumerate some of the problems. One is that right now we are seeing on the continent the lowest growth that we've seen since 2009, since the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008. So today, growth rates for 2015 was about 3.4%, compared to 4.6 the year before, compared to 6.5 the years prior. So we're seeing a little drop in the growth rates. That is related to the second point, which is commodity prices have fallen, and the commodity exporters are worst hit by this drop than not. So those that are exporting oil, those that are exporting are very dependent on commodities, obviously are seeing bigger declines in their GDP than others. But there are still countries who are doing well. Côte d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Rwanda, Tanzania are still having solid growth, but others, as I said, are suffering a bit right now. Third, we are seeing that the absolute number of poor in Africa is actually growing. Despite all the development, we're seeing a growth in the number of poor because of very high population growth. So it's very difficult to reduce poverty in Africa because GDP can grow, but because of population growth, per capita income is still low and in some cases falling. Fourth, the strong US dollar is putting a lot of pressure on African economies. Many of you who deal with Africa would have seen that there is a serious devaluation of several currencies. And the debt of these countries is very often denominated in US dollars. So they have to basically take their devaluated currency and reimburse their debt in US dollars. And that's putting a lot of pressure on their economies. Fifth, the largest number of displaced people are actually in Africa. A third of all the displaced people in the world, that represents about 20 million people, are in Africa. And when you have countries which are already poor, and now they have to welcome 20 million people and take care of 20 million people, it's very difficult. So that's another pressure on the economies of Africa. Sixth, although Africa is the lowest carbon emitter in the world, it is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change than any other region. So it is not emitting, but it is suffering the impact of climate change more than others. Seven, it is also very vulnerable to other shocks. For example, you saw Ebola hit Africa very, very badly. 3 or 4 countries in Western Africa were completely crippled for a couple of years by Ebola. The risks of other diseases coming to Africa is still important because the health systems in Africa are rather weak and are not, able to respond very quickly and address these diseases. So that is another vulnerability that the continent faces. And then when you look, you guys are focusing on SDGs, but before we go to SDGs, I want to go to MDGs and see that and tell you that Africa achieved more than 70% of progress required by the 2015 MDG targets. And it actually met several of the indicators, like, for example, under 5 mortality, access to safe drinking water, infant mortality, and a couple of others. But the others it did not meet. So the success of Africa in achieving the MDGs was mixed. But now SDGs are the next steps. They will require major efforts on the policy front, on the investment front, on the institutional front that the continent has to face to be able to achieve that. So all of that to say that despite Africa being the land of opportunity, being where everyone, for those of you who know the continent and who travel there, it's the most positive mood, it's the most energetic, dynamic environment that you will see when you compare to other developing countries. So it is completely, positive in its aspiration to development, but it is still facing the kind of problems that I listed for you. And the list that I made for you is not a very long, comprehensive list. It's just some of the key things that we are noticing right now. Now, as I was thinking of you guys who are developing ideas for action, I was wondering, if I were you, what would be the sectors that I would focus on so that you get more bang for the buck, you get more impact, and these are the sectors which really can make a difference for this continent. The first one that comes to my mind is agriculture, because you see that agriculture is the source of income for 2/3 of the population of Africa, because most of them are rural and most of them live off of agriculture. However, if you look at the share of agriculture in GDP, you see that it's very, very small. So the room for growth of agriculture is enormous. And the kind of green revolution that we have seen in many continents, we have not yet seen it in Africa. The kind of transformation through agriculture of an economy, we have not seen that in Africa. So if I were you, I would look at agriculture as one of the areas to make a difference. And so what can you look at? You can look at agribusiness, You can look at ways of improving access to water, management of water. You can look at ways to improve yields, because if you look at rice, rice is one of the main staples of food staples for African families. And the yields in Africa are probably, I don't know, 2 tons per hectare, and they are like 10 in Thailand. So there is a huge gap in terms of productivity of agriculture and yields and achieving better yields. So what did I tell you? Water, agribusiness, yields, productivity, irrigation, and obviously all of that in a sustainable way so that you're not damaging the environment. So, these are the kind of ideas that you can, sort of look into and see how you can play a transformative role to really bring African agriculture up to speed with the rest of the world and really be able to not just feed the continent itself, but also become a source of export, because they have that potential. It's just not been tapped. The second area I was going to put on put before you is energy. Because again, Africa is, for those of you who have traveled to Africa, you would have seen that access to electricity is very, very limited. And there are, the average sort of availability of electricity for the rural population is about 15%. But there are countries where you don't even have 15%. So you have practically no electricity at all. So with the abundance of solar, of sun, with the abundance of geothermal, of water for hydro, of all types of wind, all types of new energy sources, there is no reason why this continent should be so behind. So energy, I think, offers a huge amount of opportunity for growth, for development, for business, for making money out of that, for rural populations, for urban populations, and again, sustainable types of energy so that they are not damaging the environment. I mean, these are just examples. I don't want to go on and on because I'm supposed to speak for just 5 minutes and I've passed my allowance. But these are just ideas that I wanted to put to you to say that, this continent is at the beginning of a huge expansion, hopefully. And to achieve that, they will need energy, they will need agriculture, food, and a lot more. So these are just some ideas that you can sort of mull in your heads and discuss around the table among yourselves and see how you can find the Holy Grail and come up with ideas that can actually make a difference. And as Georgie said, we would be delighted, that because we have offices in these countries and we have an implementation capacity and a funding capacity. So, we're looking for these ideas, and hopefully, we will be able to continue this discussion and try and implement some of the more brilliant ideas that you're going to come up with. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I can't stay too long. I have to go. I have another commitment, but I'll stay for a few minutes. And then Georgie has my coordinates. We can stay in touch by email and sort of keep connected. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. You can use the mic if you have a few questions. I mean, this is really the opportunity. Okay? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you again. So you touched on agriculture as well as rural areas. What about urbanization in Africa and on the continent? Do you see that as an emerging issue in 2016?
Definitely. I mean, it's a huge. I was just last week in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and I couldn't believe how huge that city has become. It is now almost 10 million people living in Addis, and a few years ago it was not even half of that. So it is a major, it's a major opportunity, but it's also a major issue because you have slums, you have, security issues, a lot of difference between a lot of income disparity between the poor and the rich. And so it has its own problems, but it's definitely there and not going away, only growing.
Please.
you said that the Côte d'Ivoire was doing pretty well. I guess my one question is what about chocolate sourcing and slave labor from all these large enemies that are from outside of Africa? You have 85% of all chocolate in the Côte d'Ivoire that is slave labor and forced child labor. Mm-hmm. What is the World Bank Group and what are other governmental organizations doing to clamp down on that? Because it seems like there was protocols filed, but there's no way to really enforce these protocols. There's no way to enforce this type of sustainability. How do we enforce these things to prevent domestic slave labor in these markets?
Before you answer
Yes.
that, just because I see numbers of hands.
Okay.
I know that you have limited time. Do you want to take 3 questions? Or you want?
Two.
Huh?
Because I have to leave at 2. Maybe 2 questions, and then I...
Okay. You already. We have that. No, you asked the question. Am I right?
He's
okay.
done. Yeah.
Okay. And then one question here. This is what we will do. You send us the questions, and we will handle that with Hale. I promise. Okay. Just send us an email, and we'll handle that. Yeah. The last question. No. So I'm sorry.
Hello? Okay. Hey. Yeah, I just have a quick question about humanitarian aid relating to, versus investment in Africa. So what do you have to say about investing in Africa? Because the global view people have about Africa is, they want to just keep on giving aid, and aid only band-aids the problem, doesn't solve the root problem. But what is the World Bank Group doing about making Africa as to be seen as an equal player for people to go there and invest, because there are great investment opportunities in Africa, but people don't know about it. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious as to what you think about investment versus humanitarian aid. Thanks.
Okay, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to the Côte d'Ivoire question. I don't think that. I think what you're saying is a few years old, and today that kind of energy, that kind of investment appetite for Africa is there because it's happening. We see the numbers. People are going to Africa to invest, mainly Chinese investment. There is a huge amount of Chinese investment, but there is also non-Chinese investment growing. There is India and Brazil. So you're seeing South-South, North-South investments going into Africa. And I think that mood of, aid dependency, humanitarian aid, I think that is changing very quickly. And I think there is a very vibrant private sector, some of which is domestic, some of which is foreign, some of which is joint ventures. That is really much more visible, much more prevalent in Africa. So I think it's important for young people like yourselves, to those of you who are African or of African descent, to consider going back, and others who want to invest. That is really the future where opportunities are abundant. And I tell my own kids, why are you wasting your time in New York? Pack your bags and go to Africa. That's where you should be, because that's where the opportunities are. And that's where, if you work hard, you have good ideas, that's where you can make a very good life, and you can actually make a difference for people as well. I would like to go to your question on Côte d'Ivoire. You're absolutely right that there are, in the list of problems that I mentioned, those are some of the ones that I didn't mention, but that are there. There are human rights violations. There are all kinds of abuses going on, for sure. There are all kinds of political issues about democracy, about openness, about freedom of speech, and all of that is also there. I didn't want to make that list too long because I didn't want to, I wanted to present a half full glass rather than a half empty glass. But those problems are there. Now, in terms of what the bank can do, those factories, those companies are mainly private. So we have very little interaction or say on what they do and how they operate. What we can do, and what we actually do, is to engage with the government and with civil society and with the media. I mean, one of my functions is communication, so I deal with African media, where we try and put pressure through media, civil society, governments for changes of policy and the implementation of policy, because very often the policies have already been approved that, child labor is the wrong approach, but they don't implement it, they don't enforce it. So we use our dialogue, our visibility, our influence with government to try and put pressure indirectly to them through civil society and so on. But these are, things that will take time to go away. And we just need to be very persistent. We just need to be very consistent and in our dialogue with government on these kind of issues.
Okay, Kale. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Good luck. All the best. Thank you.
We'll connect next week. Listen, I am ready to take a small risk. And a small risk is that I'll get your questions you wanted to ask Hale. I'll be honestly saying whether I can answer or not, because I've been in the bank long enough. And at the same time, I do work in Africa as well. So if you want to try me, and I'm not shy to say, sorry, beyond my expertise, this is not to replace the opportunity to communicate with her. But I don't want to kill the conversation just because, unfortunately, Hale has to leave. I'll start with you.
Okay. Hi. So my question was in terms of where you have countries in Africa who are in poor governance, who are experiencing poor governance. This whole idea about for action ultimately depend on policies. And you have countries where more policies that encourage transparency, that encourage public-private partnerships are more limiting. Like, for example, civil society organizations are more or less crippled with ongoing systemic decisions from at a state level. So when you have those kind of countries, and to talk about ideas for action, really, I was wondering what Hale could have in mind in terms of what the World Bank could do in terms of working together with governments in terms of promoting public-private partnership. For example, she mentioned Ethiopia, and I happen to be born and raised in Ethiopia, and I can tell you for sure that even though the GDP is growing, but the room for CSOs, for private partnership is more stringent and it's more limiting every day. And when you're facing with those kind of countries, even though you have this brilliant idea, what does the World Bank will do about that? And how should we engage in terms of providing progressive kind of policies and where government and private partnership can work?
This is a fantastic question, okay? This is what usually people say, the elephant in the room, but everybody is ignoring. There's the issue of governance, good governance on both levels, country level and also corporate level. Now, I was ready to bribe you to ask that question because that's what I was doing for a living at the World Bank. I led the so-called business-led collective action against corruption, and we created a network of businesses in Africa to deal with issues of corruption. So I can claim I am one of the few people who really look at the issue of corruption in a very pragmatic way, particularly from the perspective of the private sector and from the perspective of public-private partnership to deal with these issues. Now, I don't want to give you a course on anti-corruption because, unfortunately, most of your school corruption is not corruption in the school. I'm talking about courses which address the issues of corruption, but this is the most critical one. And I would encourage you, to the extent when you are writing your proposals, to ask for a moment exactly what you said, an angle when you look at about implementation, to what extent that implementation can be undermined because of the lack of transparency. And that can be looked at from two perspectives, at least. One is from corporate side. In other words, whether companies, through collective action, can create an environment where they will have more negotiation power when they do public procurement competition to really win on the base of the quality of the projects, not on the connection with the government. You follow me on that? Because you can say, no, I'm not going to corrupt. Okay, good. Don't corrupt, you don't get the job. And that's what we did, and I don't want to mention a specific country in Africa, but that was for us one of the biggest success, because that was the time when the World Bank for the first time started thinking more aggressively on what they called at that time aligning anti-corruption in lending activities. So we are basically pushing everybody preparing projects inside the World Bank to address the issue of governance and anti-corruption. So that is happening in the bank. Keep in mind that this is not a simple thing at all. It's not just a matter of the World Bank to deal with these issues. There is a famous case, so-called Padma Bridge in Bangladesh. You can Google fantastic stories over there. Case study I'm doing at Wharton, just to understand the complexity the World Bank get engaged because of the huge infrastructural project in Bangladesh, and even an institution like the World Bank cannot handle that on its own. So to conclude this answer I'm giving is basically try to look at this aspect of transparency, accountability as an important component of making your project to be implemented. In fact, now Aru can correct me, but I think it was about 10 days ago when Mahmoud had a meeting with a civil society organization here. He made the opening statement. It was something like... Okay, Global Partnership on Social Accountability. So they brought the key player in that space to come to the World Bank and to figure out how civil society organization can play a role of monitoring what is going on. So you don't outsource that to somebody else, but to try to connect as closely as possible to those who are really benefit from the project. Now, you all more or less met Aru. She is the driving force behind all of this, and she will tell you more about that.
Hi, just to add that the bank actually has a proper civil society team that engages, consults with the civil society. So there's a full-fledged arm of the bank that does that. And then different arms of the bank also, in their various roles, reach out to the civil society as and how needed and where relevant. So with regard to the Padma Bridge, I think you will figure it out as well, but this is a project that the bank actually canceled the loan to because of corruption allegations, and you'll find that information online. And that was also informed to the world at large through a press release. So just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Okay. Any other question that I might eventually, or somebody from my colleagues here address? Yes.
So my question is kind of piggybacking off of that and addressing not so much corruption, but Hala mentioned, you know, all of this opportunity investing in different sectors. That's really encouraging. But I think the hesitancy is the lack of transparency. And so, like, on a smaller scale, so if an individual or an organization had 100,000, 50,000, 250,000 to invest, where would they even start? Like, knowing any investment is risky, but knowing that if you invest your money in something that it's not going to, what's going to happen to it.
Yeah.
And so if there's any platform to know what's a safe, whether it's like Bamboo Bikes or, like, I was just wondering if you could speak to that.
I think I got that, and then let's see, is that connected to this or not?
Mine was more of a general question.
Okay, let me answer this, and then I'll entertain this and the other hands over there. Very quickly, I mean, this is very kind of generic question, and to say, well, this is the solution or that, it's tough. Let me give you my experience. I am working on a project with Democratic Republic of Congo. Very corrupt, middle corrupt, or not corrupt, huh? Show me. Middle, high, like this. Okay, those familiar with that. Tough country. How you go there and invest? Even when I went first time several years ago to go through the custom office, you have to pay to go through. Okay, and to hire a local travel agency to handle you. Anyway, point being, what is unique for what I'm engaged with? The unique thing is that the Prime Minister of Congo, who is supposed to be one of the most transparent politicians in Africa, there are reasons why he is most transparent, we don't have time to cover that, took lead in initiative in agriculture because he logically figured out to avoid the problem you mentioned about Ethiopia, where you have growth but people really not benefiting a lot. His logic was very simple. He was saying most of the people in DRC are in agriculture. If I want growth, I'll do in agriculture because 30 years ago, DRC was exporter of food. Now he's multi-billion-dollar importers of good. And then the social fabric is completely destroyed if the agriculture doesn't function the way it functions. So if I want to have impact on the population, the best way is to get engaged in agriculture because that will have immediate impact on the people. You do energy, never come to the people. This is where the corruption plays if you're in extractive industry or whatever. So he took the lead. He said, this is not the problem of the Ministry of Agriculture. This is not the problem of Ministry of Development only, or the ministry, whatever they have. This is the problem, my problem as the Prime Minister of the country, and I have a coordinating unit to handle this. Second, it's a huge country. You cannot say, off tomorrow because I'm Prime Minister, no corruption anymore. They decided to do something like industrial parks, but the equivalent of that are agro-business parks. So you pick up an area of land and create, now I make a strong statement, corruption-free zone where we will have slightly different rules of game and enforcement because I have a geographical location where I can play around that and I'll make that place more attractive for foreign investors. In other words, I'm not claiming that overnight my country is less corrupt, but I claim I can create these islands of efficiency where you can come and do. Small marketing partner, commercial, Google, whatever Google, either you Google my name or you Google Democratic Republic of Congo agro-business or something like that, you will see the case study. This is, I thought, censorship. We wrote a case study with my colleagues from Harvard Business School, which in details describes this. So I didn't give you the answer of your question. I give you an example of how to look at these issues, okay?
I think my question was, especially with commodity-driven and commodity-dependent economies, how can the GDP numbers, how can that be used as a litmus for telling anything? I mean, why wouldn't like human index or a human development index be used in that case? Or why aren't there other different metrics in place? Because the GDP just tells how much is being produced. It's not actually telling the development of a nation. It's not telling the development of a people. And so people could be dying, but your GDP numbers are going up. And if you look at specific places in China where local governments have just built these huge cities that nobody lives in, the consumption of all those resources to build those cities has had horrible impacts on the environment, but the GDP numbers are still going up.
Yes.
So what is the litmus base then? Like, what is the litmus of success in this case?
Yeah. Listen, I mean, this is another fantastic question. I mean, you are very good in asking good questions. I hope you will be equally good in offering ideas and solutions. But because this is one of the toughest questions with which I've been, trying to figure out for many, many years. And I think there is, again, not really very clear answer to that. One of the biggest problems is when you take some very simplified measure and then you declare victory based on that measure without looking at the complexity and the entirety of our holistic needs which needs to be addressed, you'll be completely misled. I don't have an answer to that, but what I want to encourage you when you are writing your proposals, offer creative, innovative ideas on how you measure the success of your project. You follow me? This is on more on the micro level. You're saying, well, I will introduce something else. I just talked with one of you on energy stuff, and I was saying, well, you can measure that by giving access to energy. You can measure that by the cost of energy. But you can look at that in the context of what it means to bring electricity in a house. It's not the light only. It's related to education. Kids can stay and read. It's related to health. By being healthier kids, the parents can go work, so that's job creation. So you have that, the much broader indirect impact on what you might initially think in writing your proposals. So start on that level, on your specific proposal, address the issue, how you will measure success and impact, and maybe you will help in the process, like through the whole initiative, to start coming out with some more specific measures for specific issues. Yes. I don't want to pretend now that you came to listen to me, so I feel guilty of taking your time. But I thought at the same time it's unfair that if there were some questions, we don't try to address them. Yes, please.
Hello? Oh, okay. So following up on what you said about energy, we wanted to find out how for the distribution of the clean energy resources to people who don't have access to energy, how are private companies able to work through the monopolies and the policies that the government have in place to monopolize the distribution and production of electricity so that the private companies can kind of help increase access to energy to the rural areas?
Okay, I mean, another very good question, and I think very relevant for the World Bank, because this is very much about policy issue, is very much about competition issue, competition policy in the country. I know that with your proposals you cannot necessarily address these things, but in writing your proposal you might identify things which needs to be improved in the external ecosystem in order to make your proposal more successful. Because through that, we are connecting to this dialogue we spoke about of bringing the government, private sector, civil society to debate this at the country level. So which country you were thinking about in your project?
Just generally Latin America.
Okay, my point was, if you know, once we have your proposals, we know the country, then we can go to Hale and say, Hale, this is an interesting idea, it's in this country, can we engage through the World Bank the relevant players to address that broader issue, okay? I hope we entertain all the questions. No, one more, okay?
Hello, thank you, George, for hosting this event. So in the previous speech held by Hala, she mentioned that 2/3 of the population in Africa are living in agricultural places. So I'm concerned in education. So it's like the World Bank is calling for education as a first priority, and the UN currently has a Global Education First initiative. So I'm currently considering combining agriculture and education in Africa. What do you think about the financing trend, the kind of international landscape for financing of education in agriculture in Africa? Well, do you have any experience on that? Thank you.
This is an excellent question, and this is an excellent question, of course. And what just remind me to re-emphasize the fact that because they have 17 goals and 169 targets, it doesn't mean that you can separate them even within 169 targets. You cannot separate them. But in the process of developing these goals and different interests and the need to summarize something, they came with 17 separate goals. In the publication I mentioned, one of my arguments is that it's an artificial separation. No company will go saying, I am going to address goal 17 or 15. They will say, I am going to address this particular need, and that particular need might at the same time address several goals. So I would not ever look this as separate thing. You cannot say that you can be successful in agriculture if you are not successful in education. By the way, I mentioned Nestle, but the same story is with Unilever and Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, whatever. Now the philosophy is, or your question about child labor in Cote d'Ivoire. Nestle, when they go, and again, I'm not representing Nestle or they are paying me for this, but Nestle for the last 50 plus, if not more years, realize that they have to be in charge of the supply chain. They go and work with local farmers directly, and they work with local farmers to improve agricultural production efficiency, but that means addressing the issue of education. So they are part of that. So I'm seeing more and more these big multinational companies having no choice of dealing with this complexity, but directly engage in these issues to try to make sure that they have a good supply of raw material, and that will include education for the farmers. And that's the same thing with Firmenich, the presentation we have. If you look at them and the case study which we shared with you, you will say that part of their business model was addressing issues of education. I have a very, yes?
Sorry, but you mentioned Nestle and their involvement in farmers. But couldn't that sort of be seen as greenwashing with the entire formula scandal that they suffered back in the 70s?
Okay, let me tell you. Sorry for interrupting you on that. Okay, sorry. I spent good portion of my... Okay, again, you know, somebody is controlling this. And this is to have really friendly atmosphere. I hope this is not the end of our communication coming here. You understand what I mean? I mean, this is a program which hopefully will last for several years. How long it lasts depends on you. So I want to be ruthlessly honest with you, because there is no other way. We can recall something which happened 50 years ago with a formula, repeating that. We can say, well, is that BP? You know, British Petroleum, which is not anymore British Petroleum, is Beyond Petroleum. You remember that? Greenwashing. And what's happened? So don't look at the companies as ideal person which always do the best all the time. Okay? So I'm aware of that. But when you are serious people, coming from good schools, you have to go to the substance of the things you are doing, to the core of that, and differentiate yourself with the rest because you understand the things, not because you read here or there. Be expert in something and then build other things. So talking on that, Nestle has failures here and there, no question about that, like any company, like we as individuals. We are not ideal person, then we'll be robots. Okay, we are human beings, and the companies are companies. Nestle has done tremendous work with, how they call it, milk districts, completely developing milk production in China. I mean, this is phenomenal what they do. What I'm saying is, yes, they had a problem. Some companies will do greenwashing, some other will not do. Our job is to get the best of that, create a creative pressure on them for behaving, but not because we are privileged guys who only go around and criticize, but because we are doing something better than they are doing, and this is the question of competition, that we will prove that we do better. And I guess that was the same with DRC. The Prime Minister said, if I can prove that the agribusiness park near Kinshasa can work much better than anything else in DRC, I can pressure my corrupt local ministers to deliver better. So think in that way, okay? Thanks a lot, and thanks for the opportunity. Now, yes?
Firstly, I wanted to thank everybody for this great discussion, and I'm not trying to move away from that, but I just wanted to remind you that we have Tom Oliver online. He's waiting.
No, he's just on time, and thank you for reminding me.
And one more thing, before we get into that, I just hope you're going to give everybody some highlights for the guidelines of the 2016 Ideas for Action and how to...
Good point, and Marie is already preparing to say that. Not now, you have time for that, yes.
Okay, so how to prepare your proposals, what are we really looking at, and how they can be implemented, because we've got some really great ideas, but just to make sure that your proposals are really cutting edge and, you know, the direction that we want to go with the Ideas for Action. Thanks.
Okay, now we're going with Tom Oliver, because I thought there were no more hands anyway. Am I right? Yes, good. Now, this is a very exciting time to introduce Tom Oliver. He is also alumni from Wharton, but he's a very unusual character. You will see that. Very well recognized, inspiring speaker. And he will talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, and many other exciting things. I hope we will have a chance to see him. And then we will start. Here we are. Okay. It's too bad we cannot see your shoes, because I always enjoy, the special design of your shoes. But the floor is yours, and then, yeah, please. Tom, unfortunately, we have a problem hearing you. So just give us a few more minutes.
Is this better?
Yes.
See, the first problem with technology already, I forgot to hit the unmute button. Here we go. So I just wanted to share that it's a great honor for me to be here today, and thank you so much for your kind introduction, Georgia. And I've been following this a little bit in the past half hour, and it would be so exciting for me to be there with you right now. But I will try my best to make this as interactive as possible. The topics I want to address are innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, when I'm doing this with my global MBA students or with my Fortune 500 CEOs who are my clients, we usually do this over 6 months or a year. So this is going to be the shortest presentation ever, and I will do my best to give you the best of what I have to offer. When we look at the world today, society is becoming so complex. Because of the global connectivity, information is traveling instantly across the globe, and this has some major benefits, but also some major challenges for a lot of corporations. Number one, the consumer is becoming more and more powerful. So consumers aggregate more. They're better informed than ever before. They are faster than ever before, and they are, as a consequence, more powerful than ever before. On the other hand, the corporations have what I call in my MBA classes the new gold, which is data. Data will be the new gold of this century. Highly customized solutions for clients, whether it's in banking, finance, insurance, cars, medicine, it doesn't matter. This will rule innovation and drive consumer innovation in the next 10 years. This will be fundamental. We will go back from factors that determine corporate success like size and longevity, and will come to factors determining corporate success like speed, but agility and customizing solutions and flexibility when it comes to offering services and products for their clients. So that's one thing. Number two, innovation. I just actually came back from a keynote I gave in Germany. I gave the opening keynote at this year's International IT Summit in Germany. Now, as a professor of innovation and of change management, I'm naturally passionate about innovation and combining it with change, especially the digital transformation. Now, what I saw in Germany was very much symptomatic of what's happening all around the world. Most CEOs, including Fortune 500 CEOs I work with, obviously as well as startup CEOs, but even really from famous brands, whether it's Johnson & Johnson to even Google in Silicon Valley, a lot of them don't really know how to innovate best. Now, innovation has to have what I call a minimum structure. So when you think of structure, immediately you think of, Germany, made in Germany, engineering. You think of Switzerland. I think we had Niels Christiansen here today, who I recall fondly, where we both gave a keynote many years back from Switzerland. And the problem is, though, with innovation from countries like this, they're too rigid. So I was just asked by the head of HR of PwC in Berlin, Tom, do you think the Google phenomenon could have started in Germany? And I clearly said no. And he said, why? And I said, because innovation is not a linear concept. You cannot plan innovation like you have 10 points, you go through the 10 points, and that's it. Now, I know I'm not there with you, but I'm trying my best to illustrate what I mean. And I hope this will work with the camera, but I'm coming to you on purpose from one of my music studios today. And I have a piano here, so I would like to turn to the piano and illustrate what I mean by secrets of innovation. So I will try to make this work. We don't have the best sound and lighting quality here, but I hope you can see me. I hope you can see the piano. So let's try this out. This is the first time we're on the WebEx. So here we go. Now, you're all looking at each other and probably thinking, this guy's not really good, right? Who did they invite here to play? Now, this is, for anyone among you who is a musician, these are chords, right? So I just played chords of a very famous song, but usually no one, including my clients, recognizes this when I play this the first time. Because that's really just the minimum structure for any artist, any musician. The minimum structure of a song are the chords. Now, did any one of you recognize what the chords were and which song they belonged to? Anyone? It's hard for me to see a hands up, so Georgia, you got to be my man on the ground. Okay.
Gender neutral. Okay. I said I'm gender neutral. Okay, so I'm your whatever was person on the ground. But we have one guest. Yes.
Very good.
I think it was the canon in D. Is that correct?
Unfortunately not.
Okay.
But let's get to the.
Okay, we have two more tries. No, just don't argue. Just press this. Time is of essence.
Beatles, I know time is of essence. So this is why I'm speaking up. I know time is of essence. Again, my shortest presentation ever. Let's think of what I just said, right? Let's play the same thing again, but let's play around it a little bit with the kind of Silicon Valley flexibility that you see when you go to Google or some of the other Silicon Valley giants. Let's do this again. Same chords. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. So, here we go. So, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, that's innovation, right? You got to have a minimum structure, but then you have to be flexible enough to play around the chords. So in other terms, you got to incorporate this certain flexibility also as an entrepreneur, and it doesn't matter if you're in a team of 2 or 40 or 4,000. I deal with companies. I was just together with the CEO of a big German company, 60,000 people. And he got top-level people on board from Google, from Facebook, and from Twitter. And he came to me and said, Tom, this is just not working. I cannot seem to integrate them into my teams. What's wrong? So what was wrong was the older teams who were there, the German teams, looked at these guys, and they had one comment and said, these guys are stupid. Now, what happened there? Obviously, they're not stupid because they come from, 3 of the top-level companies now in the world. But the problem is you had a clash, not just of different mental models, but you have a clash because these people, these creative potentials were not integrated properly into an organization. The very rigid German mindset did not interact well with that flexible Silicon Valley mindset these guys and top-level experts had cultivated. So the experiment actually failed, and it did not work out. Now, what does that mean for innovation and for entrepreneurship and for you? You have to see that you understand the secrets of innovation. And you got to do this if you're a CEO or if you're in a team. And again, it doesn't matter how big the team is, it doesn't matter how large or small your company is. You have to understand how this works. You cannot just close people in a room, leave them there for 6 hours, and expect them to come out with great innovation. Now, when you integrate creative potential of young people, especially millennials, into an organization, you got to make sure you factor in the attention span these people have. It's really more than 45 minutes. And you have to realize you have to get out of the problem and then send them back into the room to produce optimum innovation. This is why Google, when you go to Google in Silicon Valley, the headquarters of Google, and it's a great experience for anyone of you who ever wants to go, you will see it's almost like an amusement park. You have free massages, free lap pools, free gyms, even meditation classes for the employees. Now, a German would go there and say, that's not work. It sounds more like fun, but that's exactly the point. Google gets them out of the problem so they can go out, liberate their minds for a little bit, because the Google founders understood the true secrets of creativity and innovation. And the first principle is that our minds are most innovative and most creative when we do not think about the problem. So again, we're most creative when we take our minds off the problem. And this is crucial in today's world because everything becoming faster and faster, everything is becoming more and more virtual. So the more you understand the principles, the more you can build extraordinary success in your teams or your organization. So let me summarize. You've got to have a minimum structure. You've got to have flexibility around the structure. That's key. And you've got to find this fine balance between rigidity and rules and flexibility, as I just illustrated with the music in my studio. And then you have to understand that you have to take into account that you cannot you cannot press a button and create these ideas come out on the spot and you produce top-level innovation. You have to go in the problem and out. In the problem and out. As I always call it with my MBA students and my clients, you got to get in the room, but you got to know when you get out of the room. And once you're in the room, the control freak has to leave the room. I was working with one of my clients, Johnson & Johnson, and the vice president came to me and he said, you know what, Tom, we got a problem. This is just not working. My guys do not understand, and my company directors, they don't understand how innovation works, right? And I explained to them, the control freak has to leave the room. When you're in a setting where you have to produce innovation, you have to allow the flexibility to go with the flow and the energy of the project and the team. And this is what I try to illustrate with the music. You flow around the chords, but in a group setting, you got to flow with the energy of a team. Any one of you who has played in a band knows what I mean. In music, we call this jamming. Jamming. And you can relate jamming one-to-one to a corporate setting because the members of your organization need to be able to work together in harmony to produce great outcomes. Otherwise, you will not be able to hear the music. And so much of the energy in excellent startups, but also multinational organizations is lost because people do not work together and collaborate at an optimum level. It's got to be like a band on stage. You all have to buy into the vision of what you want to accomplish, and then you have to jam together. As one of the final examples, let me take Apple, which is obviously, super often cited, not just after the death of Steve Jobs, but especially because, once again, it's the #1 spot in the world. It's the most valuable global brand again this year. Now, a lot of people ask me, Tom, what is the secret? Is this accident? Is this chance? No, it's not. This is, almost science, I would say. If you look at when a new iPhone comes out, and compare the ads, the TV ads of, for instance, Apple, what Apple is doing versus Samsung. Apple has been able to create a loyal rock star following for its products because it comes across as extremely genuine to the consumer. Now, the aspect of being genuine, you can see that when you look at the new ads for the iPhone. They put Sir Jonathan Ive there, who's the head designer of Apple. Admittedly, not the best-looking model on the planet, but they put him there, they put on a white shirt and a white background, and Sir Jonathan Ive talks for 5 minutes about the new iPhone. And you listen to him, and consumers see that, and it feels so authentic, passionate, emotional, and real. And that is what gets across to consumers. This is how you relate to consumers today. And it's the same process if a rock star goes out on stage and tunes into a vision he wants to get across. And then all the band members move as one. They collaborate and jam, as I just tried to illustrate for you. And then they're able to move the audience, so they put on a great concert. It's the same concept if a rock star group does that on stage or Apple does that with its consumers. This is the reason why consumers camp outside of the Apple stores 2 nights before a new product comes out and a new iPhone is put on the market. No other company is able to produce that kind of rock star following for its products, services, and its brand. Why? Because Steve Jobs understood, and the people at Apple understand, what makes a rock star brand. They have to be genuine and passionate. And you may say whatever you want about Steve Jobs and his style of leadership. He was extremely passionate about what he was doing 100%, and he felt that in every fiber and bone of his body. That trickled down into his organization, and then they were able to convey this to the consumers. Now, when you start a company or you start an NGO, for instance, like I created the World Peace Foundation from scratch, just based on a vision, and was able to make it into one of the most prominent global movements for world peace, I did the same thing. I went out, I just had a vision. I didn't have, a big name. I didn't have a trust fund and several $1 million in the account. I went out many, many years ago and sold a vision. But I applied the same principles a rock star applies when he goes on stage, and the same principles Apple applies that I just explained to you. I had a very clearly defined vision of what I wanted to accomplish. Then I went out and sold the vision and conveyed it to others with passion, enthusiasm, emotion, and clarity. If you don't have a lot of cash, passion is your cash. Your vision is your big name. A lot of people come to me and say, yeah, Tom, but, I don't have the resources. Most people who build great companies, and I've been working with Richard Branson now for many years as well, great example of that. Most CEOs and people and entrepreneurs who build great companies came from nothing. Those are some of the best entrepreneurs on the planet. You cannot be afraid to go out and sell your vision, but you have to do it with passion, with enthusiasm, with clarity, and you have to do it with emotion. It has to be honestly felt. It has to be genuine. And then you will be able to excite consumers for your products or services, or a global audience of supporters and a fantastic network like I've been able to do and we've been able to do with World Peace Foundation. It's always the same process. If a rock star goes out on stage, if Apple launches a new product, or if a global social entrepreneur goes out and starts an NGO based purely on a vision. So these are some of the best practices I would get across to you. And obviously, as a final comment, because I know Georgina is probably watching this time, as a final comment, when you look at advertising and communication today, it radically changes. And I was just trying to explain to you a little bit what implications that has for you. Today, we're no longer selling products or services like we did in the old days. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't matter if you start an NGO, or if you're selling a new product for a company, or if you're selling your business, or if you're selling yourself. The principles are always the same. Everything starts from the mission and the vision up. This is why Google is such a great example. Google was able to phrase the vision and mission of Google in one very precise, clear, and concise statement. That's the beauty and the power of Google, and everybody was able to buy into that statement. I'm paraphrasing here. Some of you may probably know it better, but it's more or less like they want to make everything available to everybody around the world in the digital world. They want to make everything accessible to everybody. Now, that's something anybody can identify with in today's world. Maybe not in 50 years, but today, yes. Bill Gates with Microsoft had a very clear vision statement. A PC in every home. A PC in every home with his vision statement. Now, obviously, he's realized that. So today, you cannot build a great company and attract great people for such a vision. So you might have to change the vision over time. But the Microsoft vision statement and Google have one thing in common. They're very clear. They hit the sign of the time. People can identify with that, and people see the need for this. And this is why Google has ranked consistently as the #1 spot where the best and top graduates around the world want to work. And that's the reason. Now, everything comes from that vision and that mission statement. That has to be lived and felt throughout the whole organization. So when it comes to marketing, communication, and advertising, you can no longer advertise a product. That's over. That's gone. Product and services advertising is of the past. This no longer works, and especially not in the next 5 to 10 years. You have to advertise and communicate the story of your brand, the story of your organization, and that story has to resonate with your audience. And here again, making the parallel to the rock star on stage, he does the same thing. His vision has to resonate with his audience. A company or an organization, whether an NGO or a company like Apple, they have to do the same thing. And one of the rare CEOs I've talked to over the last year who really understood this well and applied it was the CEO of Tencent in China. And obviously, it's one of the reasons why Tencent is now $200 billion market cap in 2015. So forget product and service advertising. You're advertising and communicating, rather, a story. And embedded in the story, you may have products, services, or something else. You're conveying themes around a story. You're telling a story to the audience. And it has to be purpose-driven. The consumer of today wants to do business with the best global corporate citizens, the companies that make this world a better place. Thank you very much.
This was excellent ending of this phase of communicating with you.
Thank you.
Now they feel how much they are missing from the fact that we couldn't give you more time. However,
I agree.
The good news is that now you know how good audience we have here. So next time you organize your big events in Europe, when Tom does events, it should be several thousand people. Otherwise, he don't get in the events. So you know that we can have a core audience.
The audience is so inspiring. Next time I'll get on a plane and come down to you in Washington, D.C. But I would still like to take a couple of minutes to be open to any.
Okay, only couple, which is 2. Yes, please. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, so any questions from the audience, anything we can answer in those 2-3 minutes we have. I would love to take
Fair enough. Good. Question. Okay, yeah. Be entrepreneur, yes.
Hi, so at the beginning of your talk, you sort of mentioned using data analytics when thinking about your entrepreneurial ideas. So how do you think one should go about if you're going into an area that does not even have data collected to begin with?
So what I understand, the connection is not the best, but what I understand, what do you do if you don't have any data? Is that what you're saying, basically? You start a company?
Yes.
Good.
Tom, wait a little.
Yes. Go ahead.
No, if there's another question, we collect the question so Tom can answer. Was there any other question? Yes, one more. Good. And
I welcome any questions.
Okay. Yeah. So you just mentioned that like the vision and the mission statement is very important. So, but then how do you think like is just the vision very important, or is a team and also how everybody is very intelligent or they all have a great education is also important? Like, can you balance these two, or is just the vision very important?
I like the question. Very good question. Any other questions? Any questions are welcome. There are no stupid questions.
Tom, we are okay. 2 questions for 2 minutes. Please, go ahead.
Oh, geez. Okay. Yeah, you're putting up more and more challenges for me here. Fantastic. So, and by the way, for anyone who does not get to ask their questions, I'd be happy to provide a personal email because I know you will not abuse it. Let me share that with you right now, and happy to see if we can answer any question afterwards. It's Tom, T-O-M, at tom-oliver.com. So it's one of my email addresses, and anyone who has any questions, tom at tom-oliver.com. Because we know we're short on time today, and I really want to support you in what you're doing because I think it's very valuable. So coming to the questions, let me take the data question first. You have to understand that data today is more important and will be more important than anything else. That's what I was trying to get across. Many people have a great idea, are always citing their limitations, resources, money, time, and that's okay. But you should not overemphasize these limitations. To quote Jeff Bezos of Amazon, he coined a great phrase, and he said, if you're in a tight box, it's good because you have to innovate and reinvent your way out of the tight box. Now, what I'm trying to say is many great companies were founded in depressions, in times of economic depression. And as I would try to illustrate before, innovation comes because people see opportunities where others see no opportunities. Just take Airbnb and Uber, for example. They could have done this years ago. The quantum leap they did, what they saw was what everybody else could see, but nobody did see. They saw opportunities where others saw none. This is how you go from 0 to 1 level of innovation. What I mean by this is Airbnb saw, the founders saw, that anybody can be a hotel. And Uber saw that anybody could be a taxi. But people before them could have seen that, but they didn't. So they see great innovators see where others see opportunities where others see none. Now, if you're starting out and you say you have no data, you still got to try to collect as much information as possible about the target audience you want to reach. If I go out on stage and I don't know who I'm playing for, how can I put on a great concert? It's not possible. And you have to know and understand that the data is absolutely critical, and as I said, will be the goal of this century and even before that for the next 10 years. So try to build customized solutions in whatever way possible for your product, services, company, organization. If it's an NGO or a for-profit, it really doesn't matter. The principles are always the same. That's why I keep stressing this. So even when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of data, try to get your hands on data, identify what you need, and collect as much data as possible so you can offer tailored and customized. Good. The other question was very, very good as well. And it's a question about, is the vision enough? Don't you need great teams? Don't you need, sorry, I just got cut off. Georgie, are you guys still there? Hello? Hello, Georgie, I just got cut off. Hello? So I hope you can still hear me. I cannot see anything. The other question was about, is a vision enough? And my answer is yes or no. Obviously, you need much more than a vision. But everything starts with the vision. It's like the fundament, the basis of a house. If the foundation is not solid, you cannot build a solid house on top. What I mean by this is your vision and your mission has to be so clearly defined, and you have to be so excited about this that you can get others to be excited about this as well. Some companies have vision statements of a whole page or 10 sentences, and of course they're outdated and no longer have great success. Visions have to be very clearly defined, and they have to be exciting enough so people feel their relevance. They have to be relevant. People have to feel that the vision and mission of what you're doing with your NGO or your business or whatever you're doing is relevant. People, consumers, are purpose-driven. Now, the top talent and the best people are also purpose-driven. Nobody wants to work for the best pay anymore. That's long gone. People want to work for the best global corporate citizens. So you have to define a vision and mission that attracts others because you show them that you make the world better in whatever way that may be. And I'm not just talking about NGOs. Apple, at its core, is convinced they're making the world better. Google, at its core, is convinced they're making the world better. And everybody who works there, at least every single person I've ever interacted with at Google HQ in Silicon Valley, is convinced they play a super important part in this world, and their purpose is very clearly defined. So everything else that you mentioned, teams, resources, and the others, this comes once the vision and mission is very clearly established, and it's clear that it's purpose-driven. Whatever you're doing is purpose-driven. People buy into purpose and story, not just into a company. Good. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Tom, this is fantastic. Thank you very much. We can give him a round of applause. We'll figure out later how we can build on what we have done so far and strengthen our partnership. Thanks again.
Absolutely. And I would welcome that, maybe even together with my World Peace Foundation. Our doors are always open. And anyone who still has a question they could not raise, he or she could not raise, feel free to reach out to me via email.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Okay, you get a sense of diversity of inputs and different insights, very different, and that's hopefully brings some different way of thinking and contribution to your innovation stuff. Let me now continue with emphasizing what are the 4 most important things which will be taken under consideration when ranking your proposals. While I'm doing this thing, I want to mention 3 people now who came in the meantime. Demet is here, if you can stand up. I have a reason for that. Demet was very actively engaged in the selection process last year, and when I made my 4 important things, if you think that I missed something, please jump in. And Demet will be around, so if you have specific questions or consulting stuff, feel free to get in touch with her. The same is with Mia and also with Julie. If you can stand there so the people over there can see you. They are also connected to Wharton. You know, I said it's dominated by Wharton this year. Next year will be other universities as well. But just to know that we have 2 additional resource people with whom you can do some consultation regarding your proposals. Okay? Thank you. Now, no, I was going to bring the World Bank later when we finish with the criteria, and then because yes, of course, yes. Now, the first thing is significance of what you are proposing. You know, how relevant is that? And the significance is really looking at 2 things. One is depth. It's not just the first idea you got without doing a serious thinking further to go beyond immediate reaction on how to deal with this, okay? And related to that is the issue of impact. If that's implemented, what is the impact of that? And of course, when you're thinking about impact, as we discussed, think back to the fact how you will measure that. And we discussed that issue of measuring impact. So suggest what you think would be the most efficient way to measure the success of what you are proposing. Otherwise, you might end up being measured by a very rigid criteria, which are not doing favor to what you are trying to do. The second thing we call originality and creativity, which is kind of connected with the previous one, you know, how original is that, and also how creative is that. So again, go a step further from the very first thing you got in your mind, but to say, okay, how do I differentiate from what is already there? What additional value can be created through the implementation of my project? And when you talk about that and think about that, think in terms of partnership, you know, or stakeholders. Who are those who will be part of your implementation to make that most successful? The next point, the third one, was called feasibility. In other words, is can this be really implemented? What are the implementation challenges associated with this? And when you, of course, thinking on that, you go again back to how you measure that. Okay, what you are actually going to implement. And in that context, also think, because you can have an endless discussion on the level of feasibility, but once you clearly identify, is your project at the level of particular segment of society? Are you addressing an issue at the country level, city level, or national level? Think in terms of how that unique setup is making your project unique and the impact of your implementation. That's on, I would say, on the substantive part of your proposal. Then comes clarity, the way how you communicate that. In other words, how you are going to write the proposal. So when somebody sit down and read, really get what your intention was to pass with the proposal. Sometimes we don't put ourselves in a position of somebody who will be reading that. You know, he might get completely different understanding of what you are doing unless you have a very clear understanding of who is going to read that. And not only in terms of who is going to read to evaluate that, but also in terms of implementation. Yesterday I was in Boston and I had 200 people discussing about these issues. And what they brought to my attention, which we really didn't think much last year, because they were all marketing people, MBA marketing guys, say, okay, how you're going to sell this idea? You know, what marketing strategy you have behind this idea? I'm not saying that now you have to think about everything, because then you will write a book, not a proposal. But I'm just saying also that interesting angle they brought is exactly that. You know, how you make sure that when you going to sell that idea, I mean, marketing to the investors or marketing to those who will be benefiting from that proposal, I think might be also important element of having impact and making the idea more implementable, okay? These are the, 4 main criteria of selecting. Let me re-emphasize something which we mentioned at the very, very beginning. We are not limiting everything to a kind of very rigid process which will lead to selecting 6 best proposals or finalists and then 3 out of 6. As we discussed with Hale, and I mentioned that before, is that if some of these proposals don't make it for the last 6, that doesn't mean that they will not be recognized for their value in a different kind of category. And as we discussed, you know, if that's really relevant for agriculture in Africa, maybe Hale team will say, oh, we like these 3 proposals. We don't care that they are not a 6 top. You understand? But we as an Africa region will be interested to implement. Or when Mia and Julia look at that and say, oh, as an entrepreneur, I really like this idea. I want to work with these guys. So that would be kind of also a platform where you give access to people to interact with you around the idea and maybe adopt. What I'm saying is that the benefit is not just ending up in the book. By the way, in the book we have 65 abstracts, I think, of the proposals. So it's not in details, but okay, 12, which is about half of that, which is not that bad. Okay, so these are my kind of general comments. Any question about this? Because definitely we have 2 experts here, Demet and Aru, because they are part, basically now Aru taking lead in this, who will be handling these things. So it's also very good to get a feeling about her view of all of these things.
Yes, I wanted to add something. First of all, I'm very excited to see the program continue now with a bigger and expanded team with Aru and Y2Y and Wharton. So I wanted to add a few things to what Georgia said. When you come up with your proposals, you can think of how you can create additional financing for development, or how you can improve the efficiency or effectiveness of the financing that's available. So for instance, with additional financing, we are saying you can come up with a mechanism that is going to bring more financing towards development, or you can come up with an idea that is going to increase the efficiency of resources, so how you can achieve more with the sources that are already available, or how you can make the resources available more effective, how you can make them more impactful. For instance, of the winning proposals last year, the first one that won, that proposed a microinsurance mechanism for remittances, created new resources for development, and also it increased its efficiency by creating continuity and consistency. The second proposal, the one about Nigeria, rice supply chain. That was about improving the efficiency of, again, financing, which is an important issue for Africa agriculture, as mentioned by Hale. And we had proposals, for instance, in the Philippines, an online portal to streamline aid resources available, again, increases the efficiency and impact of the resources available. So this is a way of thinking and structuring, or another way of at least structuring your ideas. So that's all from me. I don't know if you'd like to add, Aru. And Georgia?
What I suggest is that now you can continue your conversation around the table. We are expecting 2 more people to show from the World Bank, and Aru here, so we'll have 3 to help them in whatever ideas around your proposals. And then we'll whatever entertain. Feel free now to interact with us. I want to talk. Okay, good. Okay. Why don't you that can see you? Jump there.
All right. I'll go from here. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm just another participant, but I came here as an individual, which means I don't have a team, and there are a bunch of us who are in the similar position. And earlier today or yesterday, we were sent an email about some sectors. The ones I remember are infrastructure, women, and climate, and there's health, I believe. So perhaps we could divide the room into 4, and people who have the similar interests could go into that section of the room so we can facilitate an easier conversation. Perhaps infrastructure could go at the back, women can be here, climate, and then the last subject, maybe health, was it? Could go at the back. Does that sound all right to everyone? And then those who have their own groups can perhaps choose a table for themselves and continue on their proposals. Does that sound good? Objections? Or I don't know. Sorry.
Happy? Yeah. Yes.
Look it on your phone. There we go. Excuse me, one quick announcement. So just as we're getting settled into groups and starting in logistics, we wanted to say that for the Ideas for Action Wharton group, we have 4 students that are each specialized in one of the 4 different areas that we're talking about. So they would be good resources to reach out to, and they can point you in the right direction and point you to the right people to talk to. So the first person who is doing infrastructure is Walid in the back. If you can just raise your hand. So if you're interested in infrastructure, that's the person to go talk to. Next with health and food security, we have Joe, who's also standing in the back. So the person to talk to about that. Next for climate, we have Melissa right here in the front. And then finally, for women, children, and inequality, we have Bella, who should be around somewhere. Bella will be back in a second, but those are the 4 people to reach out to if you have any questions about those topics in particular, and they can point you in the right direction. Thanks.